All right, take it away.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks everyone for showing up and welcome to this session. Hang on, I'll just have a quick call.
Sorry, Martyn, I muted you as I was muting everyone else as well.
All right, sorry, that was one of my key actors, just figuring out how to show up. So just a few introductory comments, and then we'll kick right off. This is not instructor training, it's really an informal seminar, webinar, tutorial. And as advertised, I'm going to try and give, particularly for new and returning instructors, a few insights into the top level of the flight training program and how to use it to best advantage. So it's going to jump around a little bit. So the first question is, if you're thinking of becoming an instructor or just reviewing your role as an instructor, most of us have been engaged with teaching and learning in some capacity or other since infancy. And I'm going to invite Gavin Wills to speak to this question of, so you're thinking of becoming a gliding instructor. But first of all, I just want to share my screen and take you through a bit of a warm-up exercise. So here we go. So here's the question. Can you see a, Tim, can you give me some feedback here? What's your image of an instructor? Is that visible?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so here's some possible images of what we think of as the word instructor. Is it a guru, a knower of all things with enlightenment? Is it, do you have to wear a uniform with a peaked cap and a tie? Is it like this coach? Gentlemen, you should be looking at the figure on the right, not on the left. Or is it perhaps this, the Bible or the handbook or the instructor manual, and you're spouting forth from the manual? Is that your role? Is that your image of what an instructor looks like? Is it your duty as an instructor to point out what the person has done wrong? Is this the standard dress code for an instructor? Apologies to Kevin if he's there. Shorts and Crocs. Do you need a wizened old face and an old grey-haired man to be an instructor? You may recognise Derek Piggott, some of you, in that photo. Perhaps a younger version of an instructor, a fairly formal situation, complicated diagram on the back. A younger fellow, a little more cool, a pile of books, a laptop. Perhaps it's not a male at all. Or it could be like our colleague David Hurst, who puts his apologies in for tonight, who's quite happy to sit in the back seat and let the student in the front figure it out for themselves. A recognised form of good instructor performance. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just ask Gavin to pick up the threads. Hello, Gavin.
You might not have figured out unmute. If you can hear us, Gavin, you'll need to unmute yourself. Oh, and I just realised you might not be able to.
We've been trying to mute Gavin for years.
Have we got him?
We've got another Gavin.
Too many Gavins.
No.
He was here before. Okay, well, we might just come back to that.
Found him.
Huh?
Hang on a minute.
Okay, is guest Gavin back online?
Hey, Gavin, welcome.
Hello, thank you. I don't know what happened, but the world blew up.
Right, you're on stage, Gavin. Tell us
Oh,
what
sure.
you tell us about being an instructor. What do you need to do? What's it all about? How do you qualify?
Oh man, well, you gave me a lot of warming up time, didn't you? Well, okay. I guess we have to ask ourselves what a successful instructor is. What isn't a successful instructor? And I guess a successful instructor is one that can look at a number, maybe a whole number of his students heading off cross country all by themselves, flying away all day, and then returning in the evening safe and sound with a huge smile in their face. I think that's a successful instructor if that's where you've, if you want a definition of what's a successful instructor. And a good instructor, I think, can both inspire and teach someone, in our case, to fly cross country. I know people will say that we don't have to fly cross country, and that's absolutely true. But it is the objectives of G&Z to encourage and further cross country flying, and it's the objective of the flight training program to teach people how to cross country fly. If people choose not to fly cross country, that's fine. They can quietly not do it, but the objectives remain the same. So in order to be a good cross country pilot, I guess the instructor has to really relate to his students, and it's particularly to their motivation to fly. You know, what's motivating your student is really an important thing. And along the way, the instructor needs to make the process, the learning process, fun. And not just fun for the student, but fun for yourself. Nobody's paying you to do that, to do this these days. And we don't belong to an airline training school or the military where everybody's paid to sit and listen and sit and watch and sit and teach. No, we're all doing this for fun. And so it's important that you focus on giving your student fun, keep them interested. And in some ways you keep it fun for yourself without being silly about that, I guess. I think it's really important that that an instructor is good at analyzing his own flying. In other words, you can look at your own flying and see immediately if you're out of balance and why you're out of balance. Because in order to rectify a student's problems, you need to be able to rectify your own. Another thing I think it's really important a good instructor does is that he knows where his student is looking. Where is your student looking? Obviously, he's got to be looking at the horizon to do the effective controls, particularly the elevator. But you need to know whether a student is looking in the same direction as you are, or he's looking at the correct place in the turn. And particularly when he comes into land, is he looking at the correct place? And as you've no doubt, many of you found, it's pretty hard to know where your student's looking. So what I suggest you do is you establish a rapport with your student and ask him fairly regularly, what are you looking at here, buddy? You know, where are we going? What are you going to look at? Or help him. For example, a classic situation is if a student is turning on to finals and just can't get it right, overturns, underturns, whatever, the chances are he's not looking in the right place. And if you can get your student to be looking down the end of the runway when he's turning onto finals, from base to final, suddenly that may solve some problems. Know where your student is looking. I think what's also important is to know how your student is feeling. Obviously, if you're going to throw up, well, you know, then that's sort of important to know about. But is he relaxed? Is he happy? Is he enjoying this? And also that leads on to what your student is feeling. you need to encourage your student, a good instructor needs to encourage your student to feel the lumps and bumps of the glider through the seat of the pants, to feel as well as see the effects of wind under one wing, etc., etc. So those are some of the things that I think that a good instructor needs to exhibit. And so for a potential instructor, that maybe some of the people, some of you guys signing up tonight, a potential instructor needs to be in some ways inspirational. I mean, he doesn't have to be able to stand in front of a group and make jokes and, all that sort of thing. But to be inspirational, you've got to love the sport yourself. If you decide to become an instructor because everything else is getting boring, you're probably maybe not going to be a great instructor. So the first thing is, I think that a potential instructor needs to love to fly and needs to love to fly, in particular, fly cross country. I think it's really important that instructors are cross country pilots, not just because that meets the objectives of what we're trying to do, but for a number of reasons. An instructor is who is a good cross-country pilot, or the CFI knows, or the instructor trainer knows, that this guy's probably got pretty good skills. You can't climb in a thermal, for example, without being well balanced and flying quite, flying in a well balanced way and flying quite well. You can't climb in a thermal, and if you also need very good judgment, and flying cross country develops really good judgmental skills. Somebody that's flown a few hundred kilometers cross country and got back can handle the glider well, and he can make good judgment calls. And what's more, he can make good judgment calls under pressure. All of these things are important for the instructor. And so one way to ascertain whether these instructors got what it takes, or the potential instructors got what it takes, is to ask him about his cross-country flying. And that can help you assume quite a lot. And I say to people, and I feel really quite strongly about this, that if you've got a young instructor coming along and he's really learned to fly really well, and he's clearly instructor material, and you want to train him up to be an instructor, don't. The first thing that guy needs to do is become a good cross-country pilot. You might have to invest another season or a couple of seasons in him, encouraging him to be a cross-country pilot, but he will come back as a better instructor for it. It's all too common amongst our clubs in general, because we're all short of instructors and so on. We'll recognize an enthusiastic young guy coming along, and you, the CFI, says, "Oh, I think I'm going to be able to turn him into instructor." Well, don't, unless you're really desperate, don't. Encourage him to become a good cross-country pilot, because he'll come back as a better instructor for that. What's also important, obviously, that your potential instructor needs to have really good flying skills. He needs to have really good judgments. And then over the top of all of that, good skills, easy to teach. Judgments, more difficult to teach. But over the top and overarching all that is a really good attitude towards the whole thing. And attitude will come largely from his instructors and from his club, and will include his safety culture and how he approaches things and all of that kind of stuff. So on top, he kind of assimilates a good attitude. He learns good judgments by experience and being guided, and you teach him, the instructor teaches him good sound skills. And the final thing I'd say about coming into being a good instructor, am I running out of time here?
No, you're doing good. Well, just finish off, Gavin. Yeah.
Okay. The final thing is that, if you're a new instructor thinking about being a new instructor, you already know how to do it. You're not going to get in your instructor's training course or in your even in your kind of apprenticeship that follows on from that, you're not going to learn a hell of a lot that you don't already know. For example, if you sit back and think, well, let's say there's no instructor course, there's no instruction, there's no rules. Your friend comes onto the airfield, you've got a few hundred hours flying, your friend comes onto the airfield and he says, look, mate, I'd really like you to teach me to fly. And you go, oh, all right. And you sit down and think about how you would teach your friend to fly. The chances are you'd come up with something that was pretty close to a standard instruction schedule, a standard program that we all follow. We already know how to teach. Why? Because you learned yourself and you know the pitfalls, what was good, what was bad in that. So I urge you to look back on your own experience and to kind of design the ideal, what you think is the ideal instruction course for yourself, and then use the FTP, which is excellent, and your fellow instructors and whatever else, and your students to learn how to become a really good instructor. So that's probably all I need to say at the moment. Is that right, Martyn?
Fantastic, Gavin. Yes, thank you very much.
Any questions?
None have been typed in, but if people do want to type in a question related to what we're covering, then please do so and we'll pick them up on the way through.
Gavin, Jared here. Not so much a question, but I thought it was a very insightful comment about young pilots, about not pushing them to become instructors and just letting them go away and get on with it.
Yeah, I feel quite strongly about that. I have seen young pilots that have got lots of potential and are really keen to do absolutely everything in gliding, from cross country and long distance and racing and the whole 9 yards, who have been sidetracked and can be talked into anything you want. And they've got talked into instructing, a little bit sort of good for their egos and whatever. I mean, their instructors talk them into becoming an instructor, and suddenly that's all they do. And they get left behind by their peers, and they get rather set in their ways. And one of the things we want to do is keep enthusiastic, inspiring instructors operating with the students. And you don't want, yeah. So thanks for that. Am I hearing you agree with me on that or not?
Oh yeah, and with a degree of self-interest, because our son John is instructing with Youth Glide and a bit in the club as well. And yet he's only been doing it for 2.5 seasons, but he's managing about 100 hours a year at the moment.
Yep. Well, I would say to him, if he is already instructing and you know, Youth Glide, just like the rest of us, needs instructors, make sure that he makes time and his leaders make time that he gets equal amount of cross-country flying. You know, keep him going in the cross-country flying. He'll be a better instructor and will stay with the whole game much longer.
Thanks. It's pretty hard to stop him at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. We'll just do one more question, which has just come up on the panel. Please tease out the comment, what's the student feeling regarding feeling the air, feeling the glider response, feeling the boost when entering the thermal? Can you just say a wee bit more about that, and then we'll move on with the rest of the program?
Yep. Okay. The student is, besides what his emotional state is, forget that. That is one thing, his emotional state. But you want your student to, as early as possible, to begin to feel the air, to feel which wing is going up and which wing is going down, to feel changes in acceleration, which is seat of the pants type of stuff. Changes in acceleration are very important because these become really important things when the pilot begins to center and thermals and fly off cross country, but actually they're things that take quite a long time to sort out. You think about when you learn to drive a car, for example, it took quite a long time before you felt the handling of the car. And nobody really taught you that, you just kind of taught you yourself. Well, I think that the sensitive instructor can help the pilot learn to feel the glider by pointing out when you feel, as the instructor, feel something like whoosh, acceleration under the bump. That's an acceleration feeling. Did you feel that? I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Now let's move on then to the next section, and we're going to go from kind of like a general overview to something of a deep dive into a specific topic, and just to illustrate along the way some of the ways in which the training program can support your work as an instructor. So I'm just going to share a couple of screens now, if that works, and you should have, Tim, just confirm you've got the soaring journey up on the screen. Thank you. And
yep,
we're going to look at a section just to give you an indication of kind of how this works and how it can work for you. Getting to solo pilot is the first one. You'll notice that you can flick up a table of contents, which will show section by section. And we want to sort of do a bit of a dive into the section minimum speed, unusual attitude, and to look at wing drop stall. So this is the section in the training program which gives a quick top level commentary. If you want to go back to where you were, someone asks that question sometimes. We're kind of limited with the technology of the Moodle platform for the training program. It's got plenty of advantages, but it's got some idiosyncrasies. Most people have figured it out. If you use the back arrow on the browser, it'll just take you back to where you were. And there's different ways of navigating around. Most people use the Braille method to figure it out. But we can scroll down to low speed, minimum speed, unusual attitude. And I'm just going to flick across now to PowerPoint and go through a few points, mainly to make a point. So we want to look at the concept of how an airfoil works. And this is one of the features in the new program, is trying to teach people that you're flying an airplane, not just a cockpit that moves in 3 dimensions. So we introduced the concept of angle of attack, and I want to explain why we introduce it. So you'll be familiar with the fact that as the angle of attack increases beyond a certain limit, typically 14 or 15 degrees, the aircraft starts to stall. And there's a really good video which illustrates, I'll go to the top of this, which illustrates what the air is doing as the glider, as it journeys forward. Over part of it, notice how the noise decreases, but notice also how the airflow reattaches. This particular video is really helpful in giving people a bit of an idea of what the air is doing. So moving on from angle of attack, there are other things that influence the angle of attack, and one of those is the flaps. And you can see from these 3 diagrams here, the top diagram shows the flaps in neutral. The middle diagram shows what you might call positive flap, and the lower diagram, negative flap. With positive flap, the angle of attack increases because the mean chord line is now pointing to the left and up. Another type of flap that we have on aircraft is an aileron, and these 3 diagrams could equally well apply to ailerons. And so the middle aileron particularly would represent the downgoing aileron, increases the angle of attack to increase the lift on one wing, while on the opposite wing, the angle goes negative. So where am I going with all this? So there's a really interesting video. It's not a very clear video, and I apologize for the quality of it, but the quality of information in it is tremendous. And it appears, it's in the training program under somewhere. It's under wing drop stall. This is the video here, if you can see. So it's, for you, it'd be right in the middle of the screen. So I just want to play a section of the video and illustrate, oopsie, I've not got the hang of this. So I'm going to play the video through once, and then I'm going to backtrack it. So the history of this, or the background to this particular flight is described in the training program. Basically a winch launch, the glider elects to turn downwind after a winch launch. And the really interesting thing to me here is that the glider appears to be in a normal turn, angle of bank about 40, 45 degrees. You can see by the windsock that there's a reasonable wind blowing. And what seems to be happening is the glider seems to be doing okay, although it's losing height, until a particular point about here, where, and I'm just going to try and drag through the video really slowly. And at about this point, what you'd be expecting is the pilot will be trying to level the wings and bring the aircraft back to a speedy downwind landing. Watch what happens though, if you can see it. As the video progresses, what happens is that the wings don't come level. In fact, and it's a bit hard to see, what happens is that the right wing actually goes down and back, and the nose goes down. So what this tells me is that at about this point here, the pilot applied left aileron to level the wings and kept the stick back to keep the turn coming and to keep the nose up. And despite doing those two things, pretty much the opposite happened in both axes. In other words, the right wing didn't come up. In fact, as you can see, it goes down quite sharply. And the nose also starts to go down quite sharply. Fortunately, the pilot wasn't hurt. And I suspect that even just turning into the wind put a wee bit more energy back into the wing. So why am I telling you all this? Well, there are two controls in a glider that can demonstrate a reversal in the direction of response. And in the video I've just shown you, both of those controls did the opposite of what was asked for. So the reversal happens when the wing or the wing section stalls. By wing section, I mean, if we're talking about the aileron, it's that section of the wing which includes the aileron as a kind of a trailing edge flap. And the stall does two things, as you know. It decreases the lift and it increases the drag. And the stall is caused by an excessive angle of attack. And the pilot controls the angle of attack through the elevator control for the wing as a whole, and then through the aileron controls by increasing the angle of attack of one side of the wing or the other. And incorrectly using these controls can lead to a wing drop stall. That's pretty obvious. So there's a kind of a trap here. And the trap is sprung. I think this is the key point. The trap is sprung when the pilot tries to straighten out of the turn. You can go into the turn, but it's coming out of the turn where suddenly you find that the aircraft, instead of coming out of the turn, goes deeper into the turn. And near the ground, there's very little chance of recovery once in the turn. Turning into a direction with the tailwind component makes it worse. The glider, as you know, loses energy when you turn downwind until the airspeed builds up again. And I think that combination of events led to the circumstances in the video you've just seen. So this is all pretty basic stuff, although it's a subtle kind of element of gliding. A final comment is that in the past, my observation is that we've been training pilots to recover from a full spin. However, as you saw from this case, being able to recover from a full spin isn't really going to help you in this case because the whole incident happened when you were close to the ground. So that might be new to you or it might not, but what I want to focus on is, so what do we do in a training program to help people to understand and avoid being caught by that particular situation? And so how could we train our pilots to avoid this trap in the future? There could be a warning bell that goes off. This aileron and elevator reversal is not something that happens regularly. I mean, you can fly in hundreds of thermals and you're on the edge of stalling, the wing drops, you pick it up, you keep going. Just providing notes and repeating the lesson over and over, it hasn't seemed to have worked in the past. We still do have stall spin incidents. And so what we're thinking of in the training program is a kind of a warning bell. In other words, a gut level response or association that can be used as a trigger when you start backing yourself into this corner, when you start at a low level turn and you realize that once you're in that turn, you may not be able to get out of it without hitting the ground first. So what we've introduced in the training program is a little module called the hurried turn. And I'll just flick back to the training program and show you where this is. It's under Soaring Pilot because it's under the consolidation section of slow speed handling. So here it is here. There's an article called The Hurried Turn, and it's a text-based 2-page summary of, it's almost like a thought experiment. And here's how it works. It's intended to work at gut level, not just at head level. And how it works is that if you're close to the terrain, and it could be the side of a mountain, close to trees or close to the ground, and you're noticing that you need to turn the glider quickly. Why would you need to turn the glider quickly? Well, you've just come off a failed winch launch and you're heading for the trees, but the runway's off to the side. You need to turn further around to get onto an area that you can land on. And you may be tempted to use lots of extra rudder to avoid banking the wing because the ground might feel close. So when you feel like I'm hurrying, I'm being hurried in the turn, you might then trigger an association with this early form of training. That in fact, if I'm hurrying to a turn, then I could be putting myself in a hazardous situation. And one of the questions is, if you do wake up to the fact that turning low in that way is going to be a hazard, then one of the questions is, can I do something different? Is recovery still possible? And oh, I've gone all blank there. I'll just stop the sharing for a moment. So the idea with is the recovery still possible? The thinking really is that if you have the wings level and the fuselage reasonably level, and you have a little bit of control over where you hit the ground, even if there are obstacles, you go between houses or between trees. If, however, you're in a spin, and as you saw in the video, the nose is down and the wingtip's going to hit the ground first, the pilot is going to be, if you like, first to arrive on the accident scene, and generally makes it more difficult to survive the impact. So what we're trying to do in the training program is realize that there are certain bad things that happen, if you like, around the boundary of the envelope where we fly, and we need to think about how we train people to be ready, if you like, to deal with those kinds of of issues. So without sort of wasting too much more time on, I'll just come back to the part of the training program. So without spending too much more time on the hurried turn, just have a read of that if you're an instructor or if you're a student, and just consider playing out that scenario either as a simulation on the ground or perhaps in the air, and see what it talks about. Now, and while we're on the subject, so we're in the soaring pilot section of the training program, and we're in a consolidation phase. I'm going to get David Moody to talk about consolidation in just a moment. But there's a really interesting video here of Matt Hall flying his pylon racer. And, you know, the commentary in the training program is anytime you pull the stick back hard in a turn, you could be setting yourself up for a wing drop stall, particularly if you're in a turn. And the thing was, if an expert like Matt Hall can get caught out, so can you. There's a really interesting part in this video, which I'd encourage you to read or to listen to, where he explains the mistake he made. And in the interest of not telling you all the answers, I just invite you to watch that video. And at the 49-second point, Matt Hall does, in a very honest and open way, say, I broke one of my own rules. And on it goes. So, okay, so that's sort of all I had to say on that. Are there any questions or comments? Maybe if you can just type a message if you wanted to speak or have a question, and I'll just scroll to the bottom of it. No? Okay.
Martyn, can I just jump in there briefly?
Please do.
How do I type a message?
Just speak, Gavin. We'll do it directly.
Well, I don't have anything to say. I just wanted to sort out the technique that I clearly don't understand as to how to contact you by typing.
Okay, we will have to do that off.
Okay, no worries, thanks.
It's really easy, Gavin. If you click at the bottom of the screen, there's 4 icons along the bottom. Click the chat one,
Yep.
and it brings up all the conversations that anybody types.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep, I got that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Warwick here.
Yep.
Hey, just on that, what you just described then, with the aircraft reacting completely differently than what was expected, can you quickly talk through, please, an upper air exercise and how you would demonstrate that to a student at that stage of training?
Yeah, I've done a few of these just in the course of if you like, inventing the little module, which is because I was interested in scenario-based training, which is a different way of conveying information as opposed to just spelling it out in a lecture. The patter goes, and it's in the text, but the patter goes something like: imagine you've cut yourself short. You need to land in this paddock. You've set up a reasonable circuit, but suddenly you see that the paddock's got cows or sheep or bunny rabbits on it, and there's another paddock slightly further on, but you need to turn low to the ground before you, so you can line up with that other paddock. And so you're committed to doing a low-level turn. And one of the things that happens when you get caught in a low-level turn is something called frozen stick, I think it's called. And I don't know how many people have experienced this, and I've only experienced it twice. And I'll tell you about one of them. One of them was when I was doing some training in a motor glider at Alfredton Strip, and the wind changed, so we had to use the strip the other direction. The motor glider doesn't have very good air brakes, so I had to come in quite low. The valley was quite narrow, so I was coming in around a hill and over some trees and trying to line up with the runway with a passenger on board. And one of the things I noticed was that I was starting to use lots of rudder and not banking the aircraft because I was very conscious that the trees were very close. And I tried to push the stick across to put on a bit of right bank, and you know what? The stick wouldn't move. It was as though the stick had jammed, because there was some primal instinct operating in me which prevented me from going into danger by putting the wing down to make the turn. And so I watched the little ball indicator indicate skid, and I thought, oh shit, this isn't going very well. I'm not doing this right. And so what I had to do was force myself to think like an aviator rather than just like a primal human being. So what I did was I said to myself, aviator brain. I kind of invoked my aviator brain. And the aviator brain said, balance turn or slight slip will get you round the corner, and the trees aren't that close, really. You're just shying away from it. And sure enough, the stick then moved, and I was able to put on 45 degrees bank, swing the aircraft around, line up with the strip, and everything went fine. But what did surprise me was watching the fact that some kind of primal impulse just froze me. I just couldn't move that stick across until I put my brain into a second stage. So I don't know how to simulate that. I had heard about it, and I'd almost kind of, I'm not sure I really believe that stuff. You know, how could your own body freeze when the controls of the aircraft are perfectly free? Well, it happened. So the issue with, to come back to your question, Warwick, the problem with doing a simulation, of course, is that even at a couple of 100 feet, it's not realistic, because you don't feel what you're up against. You don't feel the close presence of the ground and the need to turn. But you could go through it and you could say, well, just imagine we're turning downwind. We've got the stick right back. We're trying to get the aircraft to go round, and so giving it a boot of rudder will help. We don't want to lower the wing because the ground seems close, and we can't stop the turn going by easing the stick forward just to unload the wing, because I need the turn to keep turning. So you end up backing yourself into the corner where you need that. You need the back elevator, and you need the you need to keep the turn going. And then the point comes when you come out of the turn, but you leave the back stick on. So with a bit of luck, you'll find that the aircraft does exactly like the one in the preceding movie does, which is it tucks in and goes into a wing drop stall. So yeah. Does that answer your question, Warwick? Hopefully we can move on. Okay, we will move on. Consolidate. I wanted to talk a little bit about consolidation, and the context of this is to do with the concept of this is to do with what happens after the pilot goes solo. What happens after the first solo? And what has happened in the clubs that I've been involved with is that pre-solo students get a lot of attention. And in fact, the whole club tends to orient itself around the pre-solo students, because you also always need an instructor, a student, and an aircraft. And they kind of go together, and you just keep launching them and going round and round and round. Once a pilot's gone solo, it's a lot more difficult to manage the training, because in some of the flights they have an instructor, but other times they're flying on their own. And how do you know what they're doing when you're not there? And are they really practicing and improving, or are they just repeating and not gaining any more experience? So hopefully there's no technical difficulties, but David Moody is going to speak to this business of consolidation, and I'm going to put up some information from the training program on where this appears in the soaring pilot section. Are you there, David?
I am indeed. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, thanks, Martyn. Well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? But it's hidden in plain sight, I guess. As Martyn said, we tend to focus on getting people to solo, getting them into a single seat aircraft, and then it becomes much more difficult, maybe, to keep an eye on what's going on, particularly if you're a busy instructor and there is a natural desire on the part of the recently solo pilot to get into his airplane and go away and fly. In our club, which is the one I know about, all flights in a club aircraft are authorised by an instructor, and that provides an opportunity for the instructor to have a look at what the student has been doing, how long before he's had a check flight, or maybe to kind of have a little talk with him about what he's planning to do. I'm not sure that we necessarily teach people the structure that they need to follow in order to become better pilots. We kind of say to them, yeah, go away and practice. Practice is a generalisation, and generalisation does not fulfil life. Perhaps we could be a little bit more engaged with the student. It's like, okay, what is your intention for today's flight? Now, when Martyn spoke to me recently about rabbiting on a little bit about consolidation, my first thought was to go back to George Moffat's book called Winning on the Wind, which I've had for a number of decades, actually. And one of the things which struck me in that book, there's some good little stories about competitions and so on, but then he's got a chapter down the back called Practicing for Competition. And it's not practicing for competition per se, it's practicing. And probably the most important point that I was able to apply in my early flying was you don't just go for a fly. You can, of course, there are pilots I knew many years ago. One struck me in particular, was a very senior pilot, and he said, I'd just love to come out of the weekend and take a launch and just rinse my brain out. And I thought that's a really lovely description of going late on a winter's afternoon and towing to 2,000 feet, cruising back to Earth and looking out the window and smiling. And it's lovely, but it's not practicing and it's not consolidating. So the next question, I reckon, is, okay, so what is it that specifically you can do to consolidate? And I guess that comes back to what are the important skills that could be singled out. And from the point of view of a student, if a student has just gone through a relatively intense training sequence, they've kind of always been presented with some new material every time they go out. And there's a lot of stuff that they've addressed, they've internalized it, they've got it to a basic standard, they've reached the passing standard and they've moved on. But there are some really important basics which, and I'm going to invite you to hit the chat button now and tell me what those important basics are. I mean, I already know what my answers are, but let's get a bit of engagement here. What is, yeah, I'm going to shut up now and see what comes up on the chat. I'd like to see half a dozen answers. You don't have to be right. We can just talk about what comes up, please. Does everybody know how to use the chat?
Just while we're waiting, David, maybe just giving a chance for people to get their typing fingers into action again.
Here we go. Yep.
Perhaps we can just suggest what some of those things would be in the soaring pilot checklist. So things that need to be consolidated, what are we talking about? Well, lookout obviously is one of the first things that needs to be consolidated. And in general, as you work through the training program, you'll see that in many of these topics that appear in the soaring pilot section, they're very similar to the ones in the solo pilot, but the standard is higher, or the depth of understanding is required to be greater, or that people are prepared to do it better. So lookout is a key one that needs consolidating. Turning, you won't get to climb the glider unless you can turn. So the turns need to have 45 degrees angle of bank, and you need to go round and round in circles. The slip skid yaw thing, that whole business of flying the glider in balance, again, needs to be consolidated. What's good enough for solo flight isn't really going to cut the mustard once you start flying, trying to climb the glider and start to fly across country. Circuits obviously need to be able to cope with stronger conditions, more options like side slips and slipping turns. You need to be able to deal with stronger conditions, landing in crosswind and strong wind, and getting better at getting your landing distance under control. So this is all consolidation. Wing to drop stall consolidation we've talked about. Spins and spiral dives. The lazy 8 maneuver is a kind of a fun way of consolidating three-dimensional movement with speed control and bank control. And it's very similar to the entry and exit maneuver that you'd use with a thermal. And then the sections on aerotow consolidation, just going through all of the key stuff again, and the same with winch launch. So if you like, the first 2/3 of the soaring pilot section, until you get onto soaring techniques, is actually consolidation of material that you've already been introduced to, but need to get better at. So let's have a look at what's on the, David, can you read the?
Yep, yeah, no, sure. The first one is from Gavin, which says consolidating towards flying the 50K flight. That's a really good high-level summary. What I'm trying to focus on is breaking that down to specific exercises. And interesting, as you went through that list there, a number of those things, Martyn, are around circuit and landing. You know, I regard, like every time you do a flight, what do they say? Takeoff is optional, landing is inevitable. So you will be doing a circuit approach landing every flight, no question. And your target there, I guess, is to get better control over that. So what are the controls that you need to execute a really good circuit? Part of it is a judgment, determining the wind, and of course the basic skills about managing your airspeed and attitude. Thank you, Mark. And the ability to enter and exit turns. I recall one of the things that I did endlessly, as back about me again, of course, as a young bloke, can't think of anything to do, still there, great, S turns. So 45 degrees one way, okay, straight rolling in the other way, 45 degrees back again. In, out, keep the string in the middle, all the way, slow rates, fast rates, the whole thing. Just getting really on top of, it's one little aspect, but until you've got those things right and you can adjust your circle in the thermal, you're going to have much more trouble climbing away. Judging wind direction and speed's another one. I guess one of the things is that we want to try and develop individual responsibility in our trainee pilots. Right, the conversation might go something like, okay, yeah, sure, you've been flying, you've flown every weekend for the last 3 or 4 weeks, that's fine, back in a single seater. But tell me, what are you going to practice today? What's your objective for this flight? Oh, I just want to go for a fly. Well, that's lovely. You know, did you do that last weekend as well? How about picking a particular skill, right? How long since you've done a straight stall? How long since you've done wing drop stalls? How long since you've done steep turns? Or maybe you want to think about when you're approaching a paddock, you'll need to know what the wind is. If you're 50 k's away from here and maybe the sea breezes come in, how do you know what the wind speed is roughly and what direction it's coming from? How are you going to figure that out from the air? Do some homework and then go up and carry our little exercise, right? If you want a briefing on it, sure, we can talk it through. Or you can go read a book. Or you can just go and have a go and see what happens. And then we can come back and have a debrief afterwards. But the important, and that's, I'm just trying to summarize what George Moffat says. Another really good one he says is one of the critical areas for getting your cross-country speed up is the ability to centre thermals. Anybody can centre a thermal at 4,000 feet. When you are slightly challenged by the immediate circumstances and you're down to 1,500, 2,000 feet, it can make a lot of difference whether you're confident that you can re-enter. So instead of just sitting up at cloud base for an hour and looking at the view, how about you climb to cloud base and then you pull the brakes out and you go back down to your tow release height and you find another thermal there and you practice centering on that and getting away in it. So that there are, I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. John Brooks, accurate turning with 45-degree bank, but not too fast. Don't let turns become corrugated. Yep. Georgia points out practicing final glides. Yes, you can do it, but remember this is not yet a cross-country pilot. So this person might go out to the maximum distance from the airfield and find out from there how many 100 feet they need to get back again, just so they have a feel for how far they might go in range at all times, of course.
So I meant by that is you could pick an altitude that you want to reach at a certain area, say 2,000 feet at the end of the airfield, and then practice flying to there so that you're always within range, but you could practice local areas.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. One there from Lon Kelly. Lon, can you talk to us? What? Now that scrolled off the top of my screen. Anyway, Lon was talking about post-flight analysis for the GoPro. You know, are your circles round? Are you doing 45-degree turns, which you can tell from the ping frequency and so on? But the point is, in order to do analysis and have it meaningful, you must have known what you tried to do. So again, I think that, sorry, if that's you, Lon, where you go? Can you talk about that for a minute?
Oh, I just think that a lot of pre-solo and post-solo pilots show up at the field with the phone and a GoPro, and they're interested in doing this, and we could teach, you know, how you might productively use all this data you've got to do some chair flying and really ask yourself questions about how you're performing.
Yeah, great idea, because one of the elements that's missing, if you like, from this stage of flying is an instructor's oversight. But if you come back and you've got some GoPro footage and it shows the string visiting both extremes, you know, that's a useful thing that others can interact with you to give you some coaching on. Or, hey, maybe that string's going out to the side, you're not using enough rudder when you're entering a turn. Did you realise you're doing that? It's fine in the turn, but the entries and exit are a bit messy. So yeah, yeah, good thought. One there about think about what's different today from other times I have flown, about self, other gliders and conditions. Interesting, because that implies that the pilot's head is not only in control of the aircraft and practicing her own skills, but also the head is outside taking in the big picture. And I think that's an interesting transition which starts to take place during this consolidation phase. In the beginning, one is so busy that some kind of lookout is part of a sequence of things that you do rather than something which you're constantly present to whilst the other stuff happens by itself. I remember teaching numerous young people in my family to drive, and one of the things that it's necessary to do is to get stick shift, of course, that's how old I am, it's necessary that the gear changing thing becomes automatic, that you don't have to think, oh, I need to be down 2 gears. No, that you are changing gears and throttle appropriately as the speed of the vehicle goes up and down while you're thinking about something else, where you're steering and watching road signs and traffic and the like. So we need to get to the point where the things like keeping your attitude, keeping your airspeed right, keeping your lookout become much more ingrained, much more automatic. And in the process of doing those things, using learned procedures, you've then got extra attention to focus on what is different today from the other times. What are the clouds looking like? Where are the other gliders? Hey, that guy over there is climbing really well or is right up at cloud base. Some more here. Murray Wardell suggests about the discipline of circuit downwind base, and a final 30 seconds. Emphasis, yep. Again, getting the desirable glide, just polishing the skills. What's your nominated safe speed near the ground that you're going to fly the circuit at? Okay, well, how accurately are you going to maintain that today? Yeah, if you want to go cross country and feel confident, there is nothing like feeling like you can do consistent, safe and short landings. John Tullett, experience flying with an instructor outside of gliding range. Absolutely. John, do you want to talk about that a bit? Maybe not. Okay. So just in summary then, there are some specific exercises that are listed in the FTP. Consolidate this, consolidate that. And on top of that, I think the important discipline that we work with our pilots to develop is, what am I going to practice today? Or what 2 things am I going to practice today? And going back to good old George Moffat again, one of the things is to recognise your own weaknesses. Which again, it's important, was mentioned before by Gavin in terms of becoming an instructor. You need to be able, and Martyn as well, you need to be able to be on top of your own flying and identify where weaknesses or sloppiness is creeping in and fix it. And we need to be training our pilots to be monitoring themselves, not in a judgmental way, more in I was like, oh, okay, that entry to that turn was a bit sloppy. Let's see if I can do better next time. I do recall one of my instructors many years ago suggested that you set yourself targets. For example, you'll notice in the FTP, the pre-solo standard for airspeed control and circuit is somewhat wider than the XCP standard for control. One of them ±5, the other's ±3. You might want to consider setting yourself some personal limits and seeing that you maintain them. And when you can do that consistently, it's like, well, okay, let's see if I can squeeze the limits down a bit and do better. So,
yeah.
John.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my mute. What's the name? Our club in Taranaki's got probably 10 good beginning and experienced cross-country pilots out of over half the membership does cross-country flying. And the reason for that is that within the club, there's been a bit of a move to just get people away from the club, and that involves people who are recently solo going with instructors to Matamata or to Taupo or wherever. And it's that boundary between being safe and being able to glide back to your airfield, and then a few hundred meters away, you know you've got to find something. It's that sort of thing that quite often stops people from doing the cross country. And the more comfortable you can make them on that boundary, probably the better.
So are you talking there about kind of coming back to the airfield relatively low from saying going out at 2.5 and coming back at 1500 or something to the airfield, or have I not heard you correctly?
No, we're flying with an instructor, somebody's a cross-country pilot and just go to another airfield. quite often we'll fly, even if it's from Stratford to Te Wera, which is 20 kilometres. You've got a target and you're going with an experienced instructor, and it's often around the mountain flight for us for beginning people, even right at the beginning. If it's safe to take them outside the gliding range of the airfield, then we try to do that. So they don't think it's unusual after a while.
Okay.
Yeah, just a question on the chat function. I just typed out a message down the bottom of the screen about how do you send them to the rest?
Hit enter, I think, Les.
Just hit the enter key.
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
That worked.
Yeah, that was just something that cropped up last season when I was out with a student, and it looked like we weren't going to get back to the airfield, and so I thought that was a point that I made afterwards. It was a bit belated, but it was still a sort of debriefing. Just as I stated there, once you take off in a glider, you shouldn't have the expectation that you'll be landing back on the base airfield.
Okay.
David Warwick here again.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering your comments on the amount of pressure, well, pressure is probably not the right word, that goes on to students to self-test themselves and become very self-aware. I tend to think that it's a good idea to tell students that we're all actually teaching ourselves all the time, from the start to finish in this game. So they don't actually think that even the top pilots are just flying around because they're now completely trained. We've got guys like Terry, for instance, who I'm sure will tell you that he's still learning after, I don't know, 10, 20, whatever thousand hours he's got. And I make a point of testing myself on every single flight, whether it's as an instructor or whether it's just a personal flight for myself. And those little stories to others, I think, are very important. And also putting a little bit of pressure on them. So how much pressure do you put on people? I mean, I'm quite happy to say, right, when you're going solo and you're out for just a small trip or a fun day, it's not just a fun day. I agree with what you're saying before. It's a fun day, but it's also a time to test yourself. If you come back and you don't land exactly where you want to put that glider down, then why didn't you? Step backwards through the process. Where did you miss something that put you below 300 feet on final or whatever? So putting a bit of pressure on to self-evaluate all the time. Do you think you can overdo that?
I think an important point that was raised right in the beginning is we do this for fun. It's important that we don't lose the fun element of it. And I do hear what you're saying. It's just not a must or a have to. It's a really, really good habit which will support you for many decades if you get it right. And it's not like it's arduous. It becomes almost like a game. It's like, well, okay, I wonder if I could keep my airspeed within 2 knots of, say I've nominated 50 knots today. Well, today I'm going to nominate 51 knots, right? And I'll accept between 50 and 52. Let's see if I can do that, just for the hell of it. Otherwise, you just, well, hey, 50 to 52, close enough. It's not how I teach. I teach a speed as a speed, not a range. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that we are trying to develop a culture of self-awareness, not necessarily self-criticism, but certainly awareness. And I really like that point. Okay, so my aiming point, I wanted to put the glider there. In fact, it was over there. What did I miss? What was going on that I might have picked up because one day when the paddock, you know, the corn, the maize plants on the side of the paddock are closer than you want, you're not going to have 20 or 30 feet to one side that you can wander off or just be close enough, you know. So we're always preparing for that time when our skills are put to the test. And
yeah, thank you, David. You put that better than I did, but yeah, same thoughts.
I learned some good stuff from the way you said it, mate. And yeah, the idea that you know, Terry Delore goes out and occasionally practices wing drop stalls. That's a huge lesson. You know, and I guess reading George Moffat, well, he had a rough clue how to do it. I'm sure he occasionally, you know, kept an eye on his yaw string in a turn, or maybe we do that all the time. But yeah, it's a continuous process, isn't it? And I think the fundamental point is consolidation is the way and the place that we develop this culture of keeping an eye on yourself and having a specific mission for a flight and setting and maintaining standards. And as we wean off instructors, it's not a sudden, okay, you're solo now, go fly single seaters and teach yourself. No, it's a process of weaning, and the check flights will become further and further apart. And I think the ground interaction with our students during that stage is really important as well. So yeah, thanks everybody for your input, your contribution to this conversation. I'm done. Over to you, Martyn.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much. And those who asked questions and made comments, thanks to you as well. I'm just going to share another screen and just really sum up the area that we were covering. I think the first point to make is that a solo pilot is not a competent pilot yet. And it's only really, at least as far as the current training program is concerned, it's only really when you get to the end of the soaring pilot section that you could be regarded as competent. So it means that as an instructor, it's just as important to supervise the post-solo students as it is to work with those who have yet to get to solo. And it's described in the introduction to Soaring Pilot what this section's about. You get to sharpen your flying skills, you learn how to stay airborne for longer by climbing in lift. Initially, you'll have a dual check flight on each flying day. We have had some discussion in the ops team about whether it really is a check flight. It's actually more than a check flight. A check flight says, are you still as good as you were when you did your first solo? Are you still up to solo standard? That's important. But what's also important is the further training that goes with that flight. And there's also a warning that after your check flight, the instructor may send you solo to go and practice on your own, but it's not automatic. Okay. So thank you for that. And now let's just, we're moving quickly through the allotted time, but I just wanted to touch into the section on cross-country pilot and how, as an instructor, or almost as a coach, but you might start to work with pilots that are past the soaring pilot section. Now, if we just, what does that mean? Just to give you the overview, the culmination of the soaring pilot section is convert to single seat glider and cleared off check flights. So this is the marker, if you like, where we're trusting you to go off on your own and you're good enough to soar, and yet you are, and you're good enough to manage your daily inspections, your pre-flight checks, the launch and landing. And so you've made the first, if you like, the first type conversion. You're in a single seat glider. We're happy that you're a bit more beyond the control of the duty instructor. And now your next section is to the cross-country pilot section. So in this section, what tends to happen is that the theme of self-responsibility comes through even more. You'll see from the cross-country pilot checklist that people are having to learn stuff, self-preparation in advance, parachutes, field selection from the air, again, there's a section on circuit and landing where you're getting into even more complex systems, and you're starting to work towards being able to land with tighter speed control than perhaps you might have had to do on an airfield in anticipation of field landings. You're learning to fly with other gliders, factors affecting gliding distance, which was mentioned earlier. How far can I glide? How high do I need to be to get back to the airfield? And they're spending a bit of time preparing for the 50-kilometre flight. And I'm going to ask Gavin to speak to this, but just before I do, the end of this section is, from an instructor's point of view, what you're looking for is 2 items. The first item is the flight test for a passenger rating. In other words, you're confident this pilot can not only conduct the flight for himself or herself, but they're also competent enough to manage having another person on board as well, which could take up to 30% of their attention, just dealing with the other person in the cockpit. And then the cross-country clearance, you can read about the rules and requirements for that. But once that cross-country clearance is there, then the pilot is cleared to basically start working on a 50-kilometre flight. So that, if you like, is the structure. So coming back to this preparation for 50K flight, soaring, landing, decision-making, planning the route, identifying the landable areas on the route, operating the GPS navigation device, transponder operation, and flight and controlled airspace. Gavin, would you like to take the stage and just speak to that whole business of coaching and instructing the students that are in that to cross-country pilot stage?
Okay, thank
hang on,
you.
before you do, sorry,
Yep.
sorry. I have to mention that David Hurst, who was going to be helping us tonight and is the 4th member of the ops team, is called in sick, and I've sent him our best wishes, but that's why he's not here. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. Thanks, Gavin.
Right, thanks, Martyn. Thanks, everybody. I think that I disagreed in the last statement that you made there, Martyn. Something about once you've been signed off for cross-country flying, now it's time to start on your 50Ks, planning for your getting ready for your 50Ks. I know what you mean, Martyn, but if I could take exception to what you said, I think I think that we should be introducing the idea of the 50K flight right at the beginning of the FTP, right there, back there in pre-solo times, because the 50K flight is effectively your sign-off, your demonstration that you have become, at least in the beginning stages, you've become a cross-country flight pilot. So I think that it's really important to introduce this idea to a very early stage, is that eventually you will go off on a 50-kilometre cross-country flight, and this is going to be exciting for you, and it's going to bring together all these skills that you've learned, all the good judgments that you've gained confidence in, and you will do it with an appropriate attitude, a good safety culture, and you will keep your instructor proud and come back feeling really great about making your 50K flight. So I would urge your instructors that any time you can get a nudge in about, well, this is a good day to do a 50K flight. This is a great thermal. It goes to 5,000 feet. You could fly this distance on your from a thermal like this. Just introduce these ideas whenever they crop up. It doesn't matter what stage of the training it is. Keep just popping in there the idea that this student of yours is going to fly away cross country and fly 50 kilometers. And another thing, I know this has come up with discussions with Warwick and others, but another thing is that in an ideal world, you would take a student and train him from beginning right through to the end. In other words, one student, one instructor. We don't live in an ideal world, so that's not going to happen. But I would urge you to try to manage 1, 2, 3, or 4 students and take them as far through the program yourself as you can. And those people, those other instructors that are going to also work with your student, you will hand over to, you know them, and you will make sure that you hand over to your student, to your new instructor in some detail, and this way so the student feels like he's got one instructor all the way through, or maybe just 1, 2, or 3 instructors all the way through, and they're working together. One of the problems if you don't happen, and this is absolutely classic, in the 20-hour consolidation phase that David's talking about, is that the duty instructor says, oh yeah, you can fly today, off you go. And so the student just flies around, doesn't do anything much, come back and land, gets a big tick. What a waste of a bloody flight. As David and Warwick and others have said, going off on the 20 hours consolidation is about developing skills and judgments and so on. So use those 20 hours to work towards the 50-kilometre flight. Anytime there's a lesson coming up, or anytime there's a bit of 2-seat flying available, use it to give the idea of what you're going to need to know to fly cross-country. Now, obviously, the student's going to have reasonably good soaring skills. But as I think I've already said, if he can't climb in a thermal, it's probably because he's not flying well-balanced and coordinated turns. Or put it this way, if he's not flying well-balanced coordinated turns, he's not going to climb in a thermal. So if you say to him, look, buddy, you're going to have to climb in a thermal because you're going to have to do this 50K flight, and you're going to have to climb to X thousand feet to possibly make it. So use the thermals as an incentive, if you like, to get better at turning. And so the soaring skills needed to be developed to the point where the student can make the glider climb, and he also needs to be able to judge glides. It came up in the chats there, and I think it's a really good good point. Start figuring out where you can glide the glider to. Final glide is not the right word. What you want to be able to do, the student needs to be able to do, is know that he needs to know that 1,000 feet equals 10 kilometers, but he needs to know what that looks like. He needs to train his Mach 1 eyeball to be there at 5,000 feet, look out the window and says, I can get to about there, and then I can get back to the airfield. This ability to judge glides is quite a delicate procedure. Let's face it. Those of us that are experienced can look out that we can judge with our Mach 1 eyeball, I don't know, a 2 or 3 degree glide angle. I don't know how you teach somebody to see a few degrees of glide angle, but we are all capable of doing that. So, and we do it by teaching ourselves and practicing it. And actually, the clever instruments are a very good way of training the Mach 1 eyeball. If you set up the clever glide angle instruments, and it'll says, yes, you can glide back to the airfield and arrive at 1,000 feet, look out the window and go, holy shit, really? And then you go, okay, well, I'll trust the instrument and the fly-in, and you're training the Mach 1 eyeball. If you encourage your student to play with these glide things, and they need to be playing with this or learning about this stuff long before they get the cross-country rating ticked off. They need to be practiced because these take time to consolidate, to learn these angles, and to learn how to fly the glider really well. Clearly, they need to also, the cross-country, the XCP pilot needs to be able to read the weather. So one thing that should happen right through the 20 hours consolidation, should sit down with the instructor and say, well, and have a weather briefing, say, well, what's happening with the weather today? And the instructor should help the student decide what he can do, the student can do under the given weather conditions. And at the end of the day, there should be a debrief to debrief about how the weather behaved. Did it do what we thought it was going to be? And how did you deal with it? And incidentally, I would encourage your students, if they do something, if they gave themselves a bit of a fright, what we call, if they give themselves a push, if they give themselves a bit of a fright out there, talk about it. Talk about it as soon as you get back on the debrief. Oh, I got out there and I thought I was too far away from the airfield, and I turned around, I gave a hell of a fright, but in fact, I made it back. Let the student talk about it to the instructor and then help him get better at it. It may be just, you may be just empathizing with him, or you may be able to give them some sort of good stuff, but encourage him to feed back his pushes, and encourage all your pilots to feed back the pushes. If they're going to fly cross country, then of course they need to know where the landouts are. They've got to be able to recognize their landouts, and they've got to know and have confidence that they can land there. So at this stage in the XCP, you're getting to this point of doing cross-country land-out practice. And how you go about this depends on your situation and your airfield, but set up practice short landing strips situations on your home airfield. Land across the strip, or land short, or land between some markers, or land over a toy and stop short. All of those things will help your student learn to land out, and give him circuits that are back to front and the other way around on the home airfield, so that by the time you go out to take him to a real land out, he's already pretty competent, and he's got the skills to manage it. He just needs the confidence. So before the XCP pilot heads out cross country on his 50Ks, he needs to be confident in landing out, and he needs to know where the places are he can land out. And somewhere along the line, he needs to have learned quite a lot about task setting. And Martyn and I have discussed this before, but task setting kind of comes into the XCP pilot a bit. But I've noticed over 30, 40 years of setting tasks for competitions, that there's bugger all people who think they know how to set tasks. And I go, I don't understand this. This is just ridiculous. We all set tasks. Why can't you set tasks for a group of people, for a competition? And I suddenly realized that, in fact, most of us have been sent away on our 50K cross-country task without any task setting. Our instructors have said, oh, Gavin, look, it's nice high cloud base today. I think you should go and do your 50Ks, and you should fly to windy ridges. And all you need to do is climb high up over the Benmore range and just glide up there and land, and we'll come pick you up. Okay, if you say so. And off you go. And you might do it, or you might do it. But what did I learn about task setting? Absolutely fucking nothing. So you need to be getting your student to look at the weather, and when there's a 5,000 foot cloud base out there, have him tell you, well, how far do you think you can go on that? Well, I don't know really. Well, you know, at 1,000 feet, 10 kilometers per 1,000 feet. And if you can climb to 5,000 feet and then fly back to 2,000 feet, how many kilometers do you think you can cover? Oh, maybe, what's that, 30 kilometers? Yeah. Okay, well, if you're going to do 50 kilometers, how many of those sort of climbs are you going to have to make? Oh, two. Only two. Yeah, only two. 5,000 feet. But if it's 2,000 feet cloud base, how many climbs are you going to make then? This is the kind of thinking your 50K pilots need to be getting into before they do the 50Ks. And this is another good reason why cross-country instructors need to be competent cross-country pilots. I picked up on Mike Stravern note a bit earlier on that, in fact, yeah, you can have people teaching people pre-solo that aren't cross-country pilots, and I certainly agree with that. But I think that cross-country pilots, on balance, will teach their students right from the beginning in a way which will ensure that they continue going on the way through. But if you grow up in Mike's group, maybe they can't do it that way. They haven't got all those cross-country pilot instructors. So then at the very least, the latter stages, the consolidation and at least the XCP needs to be taught by a competent current cross-country pilot who focuses on the task setting details and the details that his student needs to know in order to make good judgments and to exercise his skills. And the final thing is, when is your student actually ready to do the cross country? All right, he's got all the tick boxes ticked off. Yeah, he's got all that. I tell you when he's ready. When he comes to you and says, I want to do my 50K tomorrow. Man, he's ready. Don't push him. Just wait until hold him back if anything. No, you just practice this again. Few more paddock landings, a few more this, a bit that, climb up in those weak thermals or, and no, I'm on to it now. And look, I know exactly where I want to fly to. I'm going to fly 25 Ks out. I'm going to fly 25 Ks back or whatever. And he's got it sorted and he's telling you he wants to do it. That's when he's ready. And then 50 Ks is a breeze. And before long, he's doing 300 Ks. I don't know, man. Did that make any sense? Didn't make a lot of sense to me, but if that's helpful, if there's any feedback, Martyn, have you got anything you'd like to add?
That was great, Gavin. Thank you very much. I'm conscious that we're kind of nudging up to our advertised finish time. But if I can just summarise how the flight training program supports you as an instructor in that XCP stage, and really how it supports the pilot. The design was very deliberate, and it was based on the realisation that for many pilots, it was quite a big leap to fly cross country. And so what we've concentrated on in developing the program is to put all the baby steps in place and to identify them. And so if the instructor and the trainee pilots follow those baby steps and nail them one at a time, and Gavin, I take your point about task setting, there is a plan the route section. And I know from a number of sites that I've flown at that there's often not a lot of choice as to what that 50K route would be that has landable options and reasonable chances of lift. But I think the key thing from an instructing point of view in the XCP section of the syllabus is that as well as continuing with consolidation of skills, there's the baby steps and there's the self-preparation. So those, I think, are the two key areas. Before we conclude, I'm just wondering if there's any final comments or questions that people have got for Gavin, and then we'll wrap it up. So just either type it up or speak up. No, sounds like everyone's had enough. Okay, well, look, thank you all very much for attending. Thanks to David and Gavin for your contributions. Once again, David Hurst's apologies for not being here. And if you want to give more feedback on the event or ask some questions for a future webinar about sections that you'd like us to discuss and cover, then you can email them to myself or any member of the ops team, and we'll take it from there. Okay, thanks again, everyone.
Martyn.
Yes.
Hey, there was a quick question from Pedro about converting his instructor license from Brazil to New Zealand.
We'll do that offline, I think.
Okay.
If he can just contact me, that would be great. Yeah. Anything else? Great. Okay, thanks. I'm going to close the session there now. Thank you once again for coming. And if there's a bit of demand, then we may have some further sessions in the future.
All right, thanks everyone. And keep in mind, this might go on YouTube later if Martyn wants to. Do you want it on YouTube?
I'll talk to you about it later.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Catch you later.
Okay, thanks. Bye.